One, especially to our instructor. Good day, sir. So, by the way, I'm Mariel Alejandro Cristobal from Indoc Department, second year student. So, in this recording, I will report about the patterns of ethnicization. So, 500 BC to 1280 AD. So, I will choose this topic is the peopling process. When we talk about the peopling process, the the emergence of patterns along ethnic lines began from the ferment of peoples with strong cultural features and civilizational influences that tended harder certain aspect of development. So the the Philippine prehistory and its peopling is a controversial topic within the disciplines of anthropology, anthropology, archaeology, genet- genetics, and linguistic up to this day. So the is a variety of data that has been shifted through in coming up with several theories on how this archipelago as well as its neighboring set of islands has been colonized by the human species thousands of years ago. So, the first evidence of human settlements in what is now the Philippines was found in Tapan Cave in Palawan way back to 1970. A skull cap was excavated apart from animal remains and was dated to 16,500 years ago. However, a recent excavation in Kalay Cave in Cagayan yielded. So, the metatarsal or foot bone width has dated to 26 years ago, making possibility of human present in Luzon earlier that previously thought a theory proposed by Peter Bellwood, a professor of archaeology, is the Austronesian migration theory. It propounds on the expansion of a group of people called the Austral nation from Asia into the Pacific by means of Taiwan. 600 years ago, the theory largely expand or the theory largely explained the similarities in culture, language, and physical attributes in different countries, in the most Asian countries, and even in Madagascar. Some 500 years ago, the ancestors of today's Southeast Asian began a journey that will become one of the greatest series of human migration of the world. They came from what is now southern China, traveled south toward Taiwan, and then entered the Philippines through its northernmost edge. Batanes, they populated the archipelago for more than 1,000 years, and then from here traveled west toward Madagascar in Africa and east of Easter Island. Near South America, linguists call building the Austronesian-speaking peoples of a family of languages heard in the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and many other islands of Southeast Asia and the Pacific and the Pacific. And the most Filipinos, the historical foundation for the peopling of the Philippines has been oddly Byers waves of migration hypothesis, Dunman and caveman type who was similar to Java man, Peking man, and other Asia Homo sapiens of 250,000 years ago. Next, the Aborigine, Abori, Aboriginal Pigeon Group. Then, Negritos who arrived between 25,000 and 30,000 years ago, violent breaches. It is theories the first inhabitants to arrive in the Philippines are were the Negrito who may represent an early split off from the first Africans who migrated along the southern coastal routine. They brought with the basic forms of animism where everything is animated by a spirit, the seafaring toll using Indonesia group who arrived about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago and were the first immigrants to reach the Philippines by sea. Lastly, the seafaring, more civilized Malays who brought the iron cage culture and were the hell colonizers, and dominal cultural group in the pre-Hispanic Philippines Lando Hocana that disapproved the waves of migration. Anthropologist Lando Hocano, a kind of the University of the Philippines, contends that what fossils evidence of Asian men show is what they do not only make related to the Philippines but also to New Guinea, Bernal, and Australia. He say that there is no way of determining of they were in it with us at all. However, what is served is that there is evidence that the Philippines was inhabited as early as 21,000 or 22,000 years ago. The discovery may show that Maine came earlier to the Philippines than to the Malay Peninsula. If this is true, the first inhabitants of the Philippines did not come from the Malay Peninsula. How kind of further believes that the present Filipinos are products of the long process of evolution and movement of people up until now. There is no certainty of how the Philippines was people, but what is wisely accepted is we came from Negritos. So that's all my report. God bless everyone and especially to our instructor. God bless her.
Hi, I am Rogeline M. Resonable and I am your second reporter for today. My topic is all about the civilizational influences. The civilizational influences is the second factor of the peopling process that contributed greatly to the character of the Philippines. Prehistoric culture was the series of migration that came to the archipelago. The strange which came from the Pygmy, Indonesian, and Malay groups became eventually the dominant influence in ethnic reformulation and consequently new cultural features not related to the pre-Neolithic culture mark one group from another. Now I have here a picture of what we call the Pygmy people. Now Pygmy people is the first people came to the Philippines and they are also called as Atis or Aitas. They became across land bridges from mainland Asia about 25,000 years ago. And also they are very small. Okay, they are very small people and less than 5 feet tall. Their skin is black and also they have a short, kinky hair and thick lips and black noses. Now the Pygmy people before they used bow and arrow for hunting. And also, they wandered in the forest and lived by hunting, fishing, and gathering wild plants and fruits. So, in that way, they can survive. And the second strange, which came from the Indonesians. Okay, we have here a picture of an Indonesian. They were the first immigrants who came by the sea of the Philippines or to the Philippines. They came about 5 years ago and sailed a boats from South Asia. Now, the Indonesians were more advanced than the Negritos. They live in permanent home and use fire to cook their food. And also, they live by hunting, fishing, and small farming, just like also Aitas. And they painted their bodies with colorful figures. As we can see here in the picture, we can see their bodies. It has colorful figures. And the next trains which came from the Malays. Now these are the Malays. They came after the Indonesians about 2,000 years ago. They also arrived in boats from Southeast Asia. They were medium in height just like us. They have a brown skin with dark eyes, flat nose, and straight black hair. Okay, and they drove Indonesians to the forest and live in the lowlands. They are more civilized than the Indonesians. And they live also in a larger village and has a government, writing, music, arts, and sciences. They live by agriculture, fishing, mining, and trading. So these are the Malays, and they came after the Indonesians about 2,000 years ago. This enrichment process was augmented by influences of two major civilizations in Asia whose beginnings went back to the 3rd or 4th millennium BC. Okay, now we have here Chinese economic and socio-cultural influences came by way of Chinese porcelain, silk, and traders, and the later being largely male intermarried with native women. The other civilizational influences coming from the Indian subcontinent filtered in the archipelago by way of two Indianized empires between the 8th and the 14th centuries. The impact could be clearly seen in the political and cultural developments in the archipelago. Now I have here a picture of an example of a porcelain. Picture 2, I have here a silk, and picture 3 is the traders. Now between the 10th and 16th centuries and before the Spanish colonization, Chinese traders sold to the Philippines. They brought porcelain and silk in exchange for baywalks, their horn, and tripangs, or what we call sea slug. The trade with China was the beginning of a major influence and contribution within the Filipino culture. And now let's proceed to the next page. And these are the mestizos, or the Chinese mestizos, and they are an important element of the Philippine society in 19th century. They played a significant role in the formation of the Filipino middle class, in the agitation for reforms in the 1898 revolution, and in the formation of what is now known as the Filipino nationality. The other civilizational influences coming from the Indian subcontinent filtered in the archipelago by way of two Indianized empires between the 8th and the 14th centuries. The impact could be clearly seen in the political and cultural developments in the archipelago. Now, from the 3rd century AD, archaeological artifacts were augmented by historical evidence to show the direct interactions between China and Southeast Asia. Earlier, the contacts with China were directly carried through the Mon state of Tunson or Fonan, but largely, if not mainly, confirmed to the northern part of the Malay Peninsula. The motivation for such a contact came from the clashes of the traditional overland route through the Central Asia by barbaric invasions which forced Chinese movements to the south and the development of Chinese maritime trade with the Southeast Asia. This also received an encouragement from the Southeast Asian shipping facilities which literally dominated the Asian seas. Now I have here an example of what we call First, we have your archaeological artifacts were augmented by historical evidences to show the direct interaction between China and Southeast Asia. And these are some examples of an artifact. Now, the artifacts and features provided the only clues about an ancient community or civilizational prehistoric civilizations and did not leave behind written records, so we cannot read about them. That's why also artifacts plays an important role in history. Now, the maritime region of Southeast Asia played an important but varying role in connecting South Asia and China prior to the 16th century with regard to commercial exchanges, traders, ships, and polities. In Southeast Asia, facilitated and sometimes controlled the flow of goods. Now, as we can see here in the picture, we can see an old man, and his name is Fa Xin. And Fa Xin is a Chinese Buddhist, and he wrote of his travels in India 413 to 14 AD, and nothing such place as Java among others, and he is a foreign traveler. Now, the other Chinese sources also mention the Southeast Asian ship Conlan as having traded with Nanhai of the Southeast Asia, presumably including Java and Srivijaya. And this is the picture of a ship. This is what we call a ship Conlan. And next we have here a Canton. Okay, this is a Canton Chinese port. And by 18th century, as a result of the intensification and increase of the China trade and the consequent development of various trading points of the Southeast Asian coast, Srivijaya emerged the Canton and became an important Chinese port. Okay, this picture here, as we can see, this is the Chinese port, and this is what we call a canton. And next, let's talk about the China under the Song dynasty. As we can see here in the picture, we can see a man, and this man is Xiao Zhukua. And Xiao Zhukua is reported this rise of China's mercantile shipping in 1225 AD by 1330 AD. With the decline of Srivijaya, a greater part of regional trading has passed to Chinese hands. And by the time of Song dynasty, Southeast Asian vessels and Chinese trading ships began to call directly as Southeast Asian ports. Now, Emperor Taizu limited trade only the vessels of China, and Canton became the only port of entry for such trade. What developed was an illegal trade and the rise of Mahapahet, which led to the decline of China's trade with Southeast Asia. Now, the subsequent decline of Mahapahet and the spread of Chinese influence under the Mongol rule to Southeast Asia affected the development of cultural institutions in the indigenized empires. Here, cultural influences had penetrated into the fabric of Southeast Asian cultures, including the Philippines, and particularly in the social and economic aspects of development. And in contrast to China, India's influences on the Philippines were more indirect and were found in the religious, cultural aspects of pre-colonial society. Although some portions of the political systems to a certain extent showed possible influences from Indian political institutions, the influences came by way of two Indianized empires. Significantly, the contributions of the Indianized empires was in the religious cultural aspects of society. This was a logical area of influence because Indian civilization had become rooted in and circumscribed by Hinduism after the disappearance of Buddhism from India, and religious concepts like Bathala, Narka, Sorga, and etc. are of the Hindu origin, although the terms like Maharaja and Raja may be ultimately traced to its Indian source through the Indonesian and Malaysian channels. And that is the end of my report, and that is all, and God bless.
God bless, sir. So I am Kimberly M. Obidencio, taking up the Bachelor of Elementary Education, second year college. So I am the third reporter of this group. So my topic is all about the ethnic synthesis. What is ethnic group? So when we say ethnic group, it is can be used to people of the same race and nationality with a long shared history and distinct culture. So ethnic group it is a group of people. So every group is lahi o nationality or language. So the ethnic synthesis. In a sense, one of the obvious developments from the dynamic interaction between a specific ecological system and external influences was the emergence of ethno-linguistic groups. In the archipelago, somewhat different generally from their kinship in the region. So, the ethnic synthesis is gidevelop ni siya tungod sa pag-interact in ecological system and external influences nga gi-emerge siya sa uh, ethno-linguistic groups. So when we say ethnic linguistics groups um is a group of people who share a common cultural ancestry and language. One line appeared in the northern part along the Ilocos cultural influence as a more advanced lowland. Culture bringing into its orbit some of the members of the upland societies. So the Ilocos cultural influence as a more advanced in lowlands. So lowlands means is patag ang ilang soil in Ilocos. So their culture uh, will bringing into its orbit and some of the members of the upland societies. And because of upland societies is kaning upland is kaning kabundukan ay kanang daghan sila ay kanang buntod-buntod ang ilang ginapuy-an ang ilang some of the members of ethnic group they live in the upland. So the second line appeared. The Pangasinan, which was also an advanced lowland culture, represented a separate process affecting the adjacent groups. So, in the first is, ang Iloco is same sila sa second line nga, advanced sila og lowland. But, in Pangasinan, uh, it represent a separate process affect the adjacent groups. So, ang Pangasinan culture, they affecting sa ilahang uh, sa ilang silingan nga laing grupo. Naapektahan sila ilang culture because of the adjacent groups. The third line appeared. It is represented a separate process affecting the adjacent groups. The third line, which involved mainly the unplanned societies, was the Igorot or uh, Golote process whose strains extended to all the ethnic groups inhabiting the Cordilleras and other mountain regions. So, the term Igorot was the same time applied to all the mountain peoples of northern Luzon, separate or distinct from the Ilocos and Pangasinan. So, ang Igorot is nagsugod ay dito sila gikan sa Ilocos and Pangasinan dito sa pinakabukid sa Ilocos and Pangasinan. So, ang halos based on my research is ang mga Igorot is dito halos din sila nagapuyo is sa mountain nga walay ilang group dito is ila rasad is uh, they have their own language or culture. So in 1942, according to Tanko, there were 18 linguistic groups in Luzon, 5 in Visayas, 20 in Mindanao, Sulu, and 4 mixed historic groups. Of the Negreto Etas, 7 were in Luzon, 3 in Central Philippines, and 2 in Mindanao. The mixed group consisted of the Caviteño, Ermitaño, Chabacano, and Davaoeño. So, si Marcelo Tangco, he is the professor of anthropology at the University of the Philippines. It is had in his list 45 linguistic groups. But he pointed out that before the Christian era, there are 43 subgroups of non-Christian speaking and 97 sub-dialects. 7 of the groups were Muslims and 35 were pagans. And then, the Christians group had 5 major and 19 minor groups. The next group will be the Caviteño, Ermitaño, Chabacano, and Davaoeño. So, ang kaning Caviteño is lugar ani is Cavite. Ang Chabacano is while ang Davaoeño is from Davao. So, in the 10th century, the ferment of cultures involving interaction between original communities on one hand and migrants on the other clearly led to cultural breakthroughs in which political, economic, and social changes indicated positive assimilation of progressive ideas. Ang mga dayuhan like mga Chinese and etc. is sila ay maoy nanguna sa kultura para matagumpay ang politika, economics, and social changes nga maunlad nila ang ilang idea to change the para matagumpay nila ang political and economics. The new concepts were shown by the communities or settlements, especially those remarkable benefits brought about the Metal Age. Even cultural refinement in terms of art and values was obvious, so that at the close of the Metal Age, in the 10th century, the Philippines landscape witnessed the emerge of society eager to learn and acquire new technology devices and concepts essential to progress. The two earlier ones, Chinese and Indian, had already given the archipelago certain economic, social, and political ingredients that enrich the vocabulary and experience of the inhabitants. In fact, geopolitical considerations had become influential in the rise of distinct ethno-linguistic groups. In various parts of the archipelago, as the population increased significantly to about half a million or more by the time of the Islamic advent, about a million by Spanish contact.
Good day, everyone. This is Habanlita de los Maribacos, and this is the part of my report. So we have here the two earliest one, the Chinese and Indian, had already given an archipelago certain economics, social, and political ingredients that enrich the vocabulary and experience of the inhabitants. So in the geographical consideration had become influential in the rise of distinct ethno-linguistic groups in various parts of the archipelago. Okay, we have here the institutions that emerged during the pre-Islamic era. So there are three institutions during the pre-Islamic era. The first one is the political institutions, followed by the economic institution, and lastly, the socio-cultural processes. So I will be discussing the first one, which is the political institutions. So in the political institutions, this involves the patterns of leadership during the pre-Islamic um, era. The archipelago saw the rise of several patterns of leadership from the north to south, Luzon, from coast to inland areas. So there are two areas, namely north and south areas in Luzon here. So I will be discussing the first from the I will be discussing first the areas from the north. We have here Batanes or the Evatan. So Evatan is a person who lives in Batanes for a long time. So Batanes is a look place where it is located in the north area of Luzon. So the political arrangement of Batanes have developed system in which two leaders shared authority. The Mampos was the paramount leader or the most prominent political leader who shared authority with a few subordinates. A subordinate is a person under the authority control of another or within an organization. Example. Example. Nowadays, we have a president and a vice president. So, president will be considered as a paramount leader or the most prominent political leader. So, then the vice president would be considered as the subordinates, which a person under the authority of another person. So, in other words, a president is a mampos and a vice president called mapolos. Mampos and Mapolos are assigned to ensure cohesion. So that is for political arrangement of Batanes. Next, we have the Ilocos or the Ilocano. In Ilocano's political arrangement, the person, by the way, Ilocano is a person who lives from Ilocos in a long time. So, the Ilocano observe a power arrangement in which the babaknang or amainti exercise dominant influence and power. So next we have the Igorot. Okay. The Igorot setup considered Apo who performed rules with authority. Next is the elder philosophers who interpreted the local laws and warriors called Kailian who took care of the security and the slave considered as the lowest in the community. So next we have the Ilongot. Okay. Ilongot is a neighbor of Igorot, which had a familial government in which families, family and the family and the community participated in decision making. Um, they recognize they recognize head as called the banganganat who exercise absolute power. So the banganganat was assisted by the Mokotai, a younger successor to be. As a basis for judgment, the Alipian, or also known as families, promulgated the seven commandments. So that is for the political arrangement of Ilonggo. So next we have the Zambal. So somewhat different was the Zambal political arrangement, which simply are save the best and recognize fighting men the honor of being a leader. So if you are a fighting man, then you can have the honor to be the leader. So that is for Zambal. Next, we have the Gadang. The Gadang of North Luzon developed a setup in which the best headhunter, called the Mengal, exercised dominant authority, although the Dakay or headman has or was the recognized head of the settlements. So they also have spiritual mediums also played a role. So the Tong Tong represented the collective arrangements of powers and rules. So that is a political arrangement for the Gadang. Next, we have Tong Tong. So next is we have the areas from the south. So south areas of Luzon, the political organization was more developed. Among the Tagalog, a multiple authority system was observed. This include the Raha. This include the Rahas, um, Raha ship in Manila, and a Dato ship in the rest of the region with chieftains. Chieftains, by the way, is a leader of a people or clan. Okay, assuming distinct title of or assuming distinct title of Grat or Lakan, prominent ruler. Lakan is a prominent ruler. So they had a council for elders, which serves as advisory body in decision making. So their advisory for decision making called Council of Elders. So the lowest were the serfs and slaves. So we have here under the south areas. First we have the Bicol region. So Bicol region political arrangement consisted of Datu as a leader, assisted by Duluyan, which is the worker, also known as the workers, and served by the Oripon or slaves. Next, we have the Boholanos. The Boholanos, there was a sort of hierarchy of chiefs called the Datu. A paramount Datu heads the community state, which has subdivided into 10 to 12 villages headed by the Dato in conference, but um, refused by the chief Dato. So the Boholanos have um, the hierarchy of chiefs, which is led by the Dato. So are those are their political arrangements. So next we have Leyte. So the Waray of Leyte had the Balangay system, in which the Dato who has wealth, wisdom, and the strength to rule. So the Dato has three characteristics, which is wealth, wisdom, and strength to rule. So his position could be inherited by his son, daughter, or his brother. He was assisted in his work by a council of elders. So in Leyte, their political arrangement during pre-Islamic era has also the council of elders, and remind in his and also it um, the Datu remained in his position as long as he could still run the affairs of his balangay. So, by the way, balangay is a type of early Filipino settlement. So, now, balangay changed to the word barangay. So, next we have the Cebuano. The Cebuano political community was headed by the Rahas, who associated, like in the other areas, by a council of elders. So during those times, Cebuano was also um, council of elders. But ultimate authority was determined by the force of or the uses force for the person to follow the authority. So enable to the person or the people on the community to follow, they uses their force. Okay, next we have the Mandaya. So Mandaya were divided into small groups ruled by the Bagani, or should Bagani is a warrior, or now Bagani word was changed to Bayani. Um, so Bagani was a warrior, recognizes usually his valuable deeds. So next we have the Bukidnon. The Bukidnon also observe Dato ships. So the Bukidnon have also Dato, in which the Dato ruled and the right to rule passed on the son or younger brother. A, a rite called Tagalumbong had Datu Patulawas was performed to confirm succession. So the Datu's subject called Sakop. This is the Datu's when we say Sakop, this is Datu's people or nasasakupan. Next, we have the Bagubo. So, the Bagubo had Dato for their chieftain and exercised both and civil religious powers as a head of the village. So, the Magani, also known as a warrior, was responsible for the security. So, the Magani was determined by the number of enemies killed as expressed in the kind of kerchief or the suit he wore. So they will select Magani or a warrior through um, the the enemies, or through the numbers of enemies they killed, or through their suit sa ilang pananamit. So we have here, next we have here the Manobo. So Manubu had a kind of village. Manubu had a kind of a village community government called Banua, in which three or more datos govern. So in Manubu, they have three or more datos that ruled them. They had multiple authority system operated on a principle of co-equality. So the dato who heard class was called Taukum, and one who settled cases was the Tausay. So the Taukum was the one who heard case. Then the Tausay is the one who settled, or siya yung tagapag-ayos ng kaso. Next, we have, the Manubo also have Bahani, which is or was a military or a warrior. So that is for the political arrangement of the Banobo. Next, we have the Subanon in Zamboanga. So the Subanon in Zamboanga, Ti Timuay was the chieftains. So they called their chieftain as
Next, we
Timuay.
have
So
the
equivalent
Sama
in
of the Solo
functions of the Dato.
Archipelago.
Timuay had an equivalent function of the Dato. He has his own council of leaders to assess him. So next, we have the we have the next is the Somo of Sulu Archipelago. So we have Somo in Sulu had only Nakora, was headed of nomadic band or numbers of people who had no fixed home. So and whose function were not as elaborate as the Datu ship. So they only have um, Nakora. Next, we have the Tausug of Sulu. So in Tausug Sulu, there or were governed by the local hierarchy of Datus, Rahas, Maharahas, and Panglimas, and a minor local officers before they were subordinated later under the Islamic structures headed by the Sultan. So before they are subordinated in the Islamic structure, they have their datus, rahas, maharahas, and mang panglimas, and the warrior and local officials as their governed or as their political arrangements. So next we have the Maguindanaon of Cotabato. Maguindanaon in Cotabato developed a system of datus, rahas, dumatus, and ambarahas for local administrations in both upper river and lower down river society. So next we have the Maranao of the Lake Lanao region. So in the Maranao of the Lake Lanao region, governed by the Datus, Solotans, second was the Solotans, the Kabugatans is the third one, and the minor local leader or assistant. That was during the pre-Islamic era. So that is all for the south areas. So the the second and third institution during pre-Islamic era will be discussed by the next reporter. Thank you.
So good day and God bless everyone. I am Shalami Bigalyarta, your reporter for today. So my topic is all about the economic institution. So the term economic institution refers to two things. The first one is specific agencies or foundations, both government and private, devoted to collecting or studying economic data, or commissioned with the job of supplying a goods services that is important to the economy of a country. The second one is well-established arrangement and structures that are part of the culture or society, competitive markets, and the banking system. So they were founded upon certain common principles, related materials and resources and rights. So in the land on which the early societies depended largely for survival and well-being was viewed as a sacred endowment of nature should be the possession of the datuships or society. In accordance with the concept of mutual sharing of resources, it is no individual, regardless of the status, was without sustenance. Consequently, ownership of that land was non-existent or it is unimportant. So, Maranao observed in societies in other cultural communities. In addition to land, marine resources, and fishing ground, were there free to all in the communities whose economy was based on this kind of resources. So, the coastal communities, including those in the southern archipelago, for the kind of fishing, sharing concepts similar to those in that land community. So, the Angambet of the Sama, who has the right to the fish catch, and the other were determined by communal systems called Komkoman Mundaan. So who are the recognized leaders like the Datus, the Rahas, the Tinuais, or the Nakuras, who have a position and enjoyed some economic privilege and benefits by virtue of their position. So, for the rights that are related to the land and sea, where it is their responsibility to protect the community in danger and to provide them with their leadership and means for the survival. So, forming an equally important part of the economy was the internal and external trade. Inter-barangganic exchanges based on barters. So sa una na ay barter, but now I don't think og naa pa na siya, because barter was an effective way of complementary system which involved good relationship between lowland and upland societies or between land and sea dwellers. In the case of the Ilocano and Igorot in Luzon, the Tagalog and Mangyan in the Mindoro, the Visayan and Manubo in mainland Mindanao. So the Saraye and Salod, inhabitants in Maguindanao, the Subanon and Lotao in Zamboanga, and the Tausug and Sama in the Sulu archipelago was one of the ancient foundation of peace and security. So the varieties of trade items coming from China, India, and Southeast Asia was added a new dimension and horizon to the economy rather. So dynamic resulted from the mutual demands for a new product, which is in the Chinese was porcelains, silk, and coins. In the India was a piece of gold, goods, and Malay is a metal works and items for the local needs and wants. So the last part of my discussion is the socio-cultural processes. So, the socio-cultural institution that emerged varied from community to community, nevertheless tainted by trade, contact, and influences, which is a sense established an ancient, although loose, line of coordination and the economic identity. So cultural traditions and foundations were crucial to survival identity. So the communities consciously strengthen and preserve their ancient traditions against establishing cultural values and concepts from external contact. The case of the community in the South that adopted Islam as a part of socio-cultural development. So, social structures of pre-Islamic Philippines was presented by the datueships of Baranganik, which social classes form a natural hierarchy of status. So, the leaders consisted of men of wealth and prestige, and below were a class of freemen who formed largest sector in the society and also provided society with the warriors, the artisans, and artists, and other special services. So freemen, also known as Maharlika among the Tagalog and Timawa in Visayas, they enjoyed the rights and privilege of social mobility. So the last level include the two classes, which is the serfs, which called alipin namamahay, who got perform or force the labor for offenses against society. So the second one is the slaves, who were called alipin agigilar. They have alipin agigilar. They have no right and privilege and considered as properties that should sold or exchanged. So those captives taken in a war or those born in a slave families. So gikan sila sa kanang ginakuha sila gikan atong war nga gipanganak nga gipanganak nga alipin. So isning kamenglan, the efogaw or kadangyan na wutwut, the tagabanwa are mangin nu utimawa oripan, the mandaya kalyunan, and the tinray is stipon mangsisilit mingira fokering system of status delineation. So it was among the Islamic groups where the Islamic indigenous blend in the social structures and the culture was quite developed. So social stratification in Maranao, Maguindanao, and Tausug societies were governed by the Maratabat and the Adat Tabiat concepts. So that's all for my report for today. Thank you and God bless us all, everyone.